Hello and welcome to Push Your Glasses Up. I'm Mikey, and today I'm joined by my old pal Clement Bryant to talk about Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Spoiler alert, pretty good movie. Real quick before we get into that, if you enjoy these videos, please like them. Subscribe on the YouTube channel. It helps me out a great deal, helps the channel grow. If you prefer to just listen to these, sometimes you don't have the energy in your eyeballs to be doing that. You can find the podcast on a plethora of podcast services, so you can listen to your ears' delight and your eyes' despise. Let's talk about Spider-Verse. Clement, welcome back to the show.
What's good?
It has been a little over a year since you've been here. We talked about the Batman last time. We're going to talk about so many Spider people this time. But how's things been going for you?
I mean, since the last time I've gotten married, so there you go. I'm married.
Congrats again. It was a while ago, but congrats again.
Thank you. I just had my 1 year wedding anniversary last weekend. And I'm back at CVS working now. And just trying to figure out what this next stage of life is going to look like.
As we all.
Yeah, I don't really have too much to say. Yeah. It's
so say we all with that.
Yeah, exactly. And I know you are now working at IGN, which is amazing.
I haven't mentioned that on this show at all, but, but it's fine. It's not like it's not public knowledge. It's in my profiles on the internet. It's fine. I've never crossed the streams for some reason. I don't know why. That it's true though. I work at IGN. It's this coming August will be a year for that. So that's cool.
Wow.
Which is crazy. Like that went by very quickly.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're not here to talk about jobs. Let's talk about Spider-Mans and Spider-Women's and Spider-Folks of all branding. What did you think about Across the Spider-Verse?
I thought it was just art. Like, we talk about, what's the best animated movie of all time? What's the best live action movie of all time? By no means this movie is excellent, but when I think it's a movie, it's just art. It is like going to a museum, but all the paintings and all the images are moving. I felt like this is just pure art in its purest form. I didn't think they would be able to top what the first Spider-Verse movie was and what they did in that movie, but they surpassed it. I felt like this one was a little darker. And I think, there's certain, you could still take your kids to see it, but for, a lot of what Miles is going through, and even Gwen to a certain degree, it's a lot of older stuff.
It's a little more mature.
I think, yeah. So, I really appreciated that, but I thought the voice acting was great. I liked how, even though it was more serious in tone, a little bit darker, it was still funny. And it wasn't funny like they were trying too hard. It was funny because it was funny.
Yep. Absolutely.
So, I loved it. And, I think I have to go see it again to really kind of, hear. I think, I saw your tweets about how the audio mix at the beginning was kind of off, I would say, putting it kindly, but I do want to go back and watch it again to hear some of the dialogue, because some of the dialogue is in the Chinese theater, and in the Chinese theater sometimes it's very hard to hear.
Yeah, I saw Interstellar there. That was an experience. There might as well have been no dialogue on that movie. So yeah,
exactly. You know what I mean. So I want to go back and get some of the dialogue, especially during some of the action scenes. But I really did enjoy this one. And I wonder now if they're going to be able to top themselves in the third one.
Right.
But, I thought it was great. I really have nothing to say. I mean, I have a lot to say when we get into like the plot specifics and stuff, but I enjoyed this movie. It's like probably one of the best movies of the year, straight up.
Yeah. I would certainly agree with that statement. I do have a couple of gripes. You did mention how I have been talking about the audio mix thing. At first, I was worried that the audio mix was just me, like in a bad screening or whatever, but it's a widespread thing. Like,
right.
The amount of people that I saw in my feed on Friday morning that went to a Thursday night showing saying, why couldn't I hear any of the dialogue? Or it's getting at least a little bit hidden in the mix. It's clear that something was up with that. Like, it's especially bad in the intro, that first 10 minutes, and then it still happens through the big action sequences, through like the rest of the movie. The quiet scenes, everything's fine because you're not dealing with like whatever. But like, I have more of an issue with that like to a greater degree than a lot of people, because most people have only been saying that it's been like the dialogue is quiet and the music is loud. But there's a third tier of the sound effects that was bugging me too. Which was, so like up here was the score essentially and the soundtrack, and then down here was the dialogue, and then down here was the sound effects. So even if the dialogue is getting lost in the mix during the action sequences, so was the sound of the action. So like thwips and punches felt like they were, like the punches especially felt like they were lacking a lot of impact. And I saw it in not an IMAX or anything, but in a deluxe theater where it's like it is using a grander kind of sound system. And it sounds like it was mixed for 5.1, and so it doesn't work as well on 7.1 and on Atmos.
Right.
And this is me being an annoying audio guy, but also an annoying, I used to manage a theater as well kind of guy. So like, so that is my biggest gripe on the tech side, because everything else about this movie is like insanely good. It like you said, with the animation, with the art design and all that, they blew away the first movie 100%. They absolutely crushed what the basis was already and just elevated everything up from an already elevated place. And that's crazy to think of. Like, how do they even manage to do that? Part of that is Chris Anka, who is a comics artist, but he was brought on to this to do character design work, and he did a lot. He did he did, from what I heard the other day. So I am a person who listens to and watches a lot of kind of funny content, and he's part of that community as well, and he was on their rewatch of the first movie, and he said something along the lines of, he did about 120 characters in this, which is bonkers. But he did the suit design for 2099. He did a lot of the the main stuff too, but he also did the tangential characters as well. But like, it's just unbelievable the quantity and quality of work that went into both the design and animation. So I'm like reverse compliment sandwiching this. I'm like insult sandwiching this a little bit. So I started with like the sound, but now I have to get into the fact that this movie feels like an unfinished movie because it is so much of a part one.
Yes,
which
that's agree. I had people. Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, like, sorry. I'm on both sides of this coin, because I loved this movie in terms of it being a part one, when I'm in the mentality of like, look, I know the rest of it's coming, and now they are actually like more than a lot of other movies or series of movies. They are setting this up as, this is act 2. This movie was act 2. It's not the second movie. It's act 2 of the overall story. So when I force myself into that mentality, I'm like, then it's perfect. But I can't just sit down with only this or with the whole thing, because right now there's only this and the first movie. So like, I can't really judge it on being a part 2 because there's no satisfactory ending to that yet. So I'm in this weird space where I love this movie so much, but it's not a full movie. So yeah, I don't know if you felt that way going into it at all, or.
I didn't feel quite the way you did about it because, I went in with the pure speculation of, okay, this is going to be a cliffhanger ending.
Yeah, it literally was called Across the Spider-Verse Part 1 originally. So we knew that going in.
Exactly. And there were some people in my screen that were like, at the end where they say, after you get to the credits, they say Spider-Man.
My whole audience was pissed.
Be honest. Yeah, mine was too. Like, I had people being like, "That's bullshit." Yeah, being like, going into
worse than Infinity War. Like more angry than Infinity War, and that's like, I got to applaud them for the gall.
I mean, even my wife was like, "Did you know this was going to be like a to be continued story?" I was like, "Yeah." She's like, "Why?"
Well, we are who we are, though. It's like,
right.
She's clearly like more representative of the mass audience.
Exactly. Yeah. She's not like into the comics, movies, entertainment, TV space like I am.
She wasn't paying attention to the CinemaCon panel where they said Part 1 and Part 2. Yeah.
Yeah. And I didn't tell her that because I was like, let me see how she responds to it. Yeah. And she loved the first movie, and I was like, let's see how she gets into the second one. And she's like, so they just Infinity War'd us, right? I was like, yeah, but it's not like, this is less of a WTF moment ending, whereas like no one knew that you going into Infinity War, that everyone's going to be dusted. I feel like when I watched Infinity War, my heart sank and I was just like very depressed afterwards. Yeah. Whereas this is like, ooh, okay, that's an interesting twist.
It's intriguing like plot wise versus like, holy shit, everyone's dead.
Right. Yeah. And it's like, what are you going to do? It's like, now it's like, and also are we doing spoilers here?
Yeah, we can call it here. That's fine. Okay. We can absolutely go full spoilers here.
So at the end where you start to see, Gwen and her, I'll call them her squad, who are, you obviously know they're going to go up against the Spider Society. Okay, you know what's going to happen. Whereas in Infinity War, you're like, so yeah, what are they gonna do? That's the kind of reaction of like, but I really dug how they kind of set it up. Of course, us in the comic book fandom knew where that was going, especially when his wife was, or his mom was like, "Wear your braids," and you're like, "Oh, he's in a whole different universe."
Yeah, that was the big tell. But like, I did notice in the art style, it was. Not just because it was like it's raining or whatever, but like it's a darker style. It looks more like the Ben Reilly would fit in there kind of thing. So it's a heavier and more heavy-handed kind of tell in that. So by the time she said the thing about the braids, I was like, I was already there. I already figured that out. Yeah. But like, I think for most people, the braids moment was like the first, hey, guess what? And then there's the other people who like didn't catch on at all until that moment when Uncle Aaron walks in.
And I like how they did that. It was like, for the comic book fans, movie fans that usually know what's going to happen, it's like breadcrumbs.
Yeah.
For people who are not in the fandom like we are, they're like, oh no, evil Miles, what's going to happen? Like,
yeah.
My crowd was both of that,
Yeah.
I love how they did it. I did have a gripe with the whole. I want to see Miles and Gwen get together. but I don't like how they did Spider-Bite at the end. I was like,
yeah, it's weird because they teased that little flirtation earlier.
Right.
And then it's like real, like that's thrown to the side, I think, pretty clearly at the end of this movie, where they're just like, nah, don't worry about that. But like I think it would have been an interesting thing for them to have followed through on that in the next movie. But
yeah,
I think they're really like, they're at the point where Gwen has made a choice. And so like at that, you can't keep juggling that back and forth once you get to the third movie.
No,
but I love the stuff they did with Gwen and Miles in this movie. I thought it was, like you were saying earlier, a lot of the stuff in this movie is more mature. And I think that, granted, they're still very young, so maybe some of the way that they were, interacting is a little more mature. Not like rated M mature. I just mean like, emotionally mature for that like 16, 17-year-old kind of range that they're in. But I think that it was a really lovely way that they did. Like there's multiple things. And I said this when I was rewatching the first movie, where this series has a lot of the I will love you across space and time kind of tropes. But they handle them in really either clever, twisted ways or ways that are just like so universally approachable. Like Gwen and Miles is the universally approachable one. And I think in the first movie, when they go to May's house, you get that thing with Peter where they first see each other, and they both clearly need a version of each other in that moment. And it's just a really lovely take on that. The Gwen and Miles one is a little more straightforward with it, with the, having seen a bunch of those kinds of stories, and like specifically like with a Doctor Who or whatever. And the way that they handle that is so deftly done that it's like, it's one of the best versions of that, even if it is just two kids or whatever. But like the way that it's done is so mature and not overly dramatic when it needs to be, but like not so heavy handed with it that they can't like joke around with one another or whatever, until obviously there's a moment of confrontation and Miles feels a betrayal, but like that's where the plot goes. It's a lot of the time with a movie, especially if it's focused on kids, it's gonna feel like cartoony high school in a way.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't want to use cartoony as a pejorative because this is a cartoon movie, but like, it's
I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
And that's what I appreciate about it. It didn't feel like, when you watch Up on Pixar, it's a child's movie.
Right.
Even though that there are mature themes in that movie, it's kind of like Up kind of skates around it. And if you are of an older generation, you're kind of picking up on that. Whereas this, they kind of threw all that to the side, and this is what it is. This is their relationship.
Yeah.
And this is the betrayal. And it didn't feel too young or too old. It felt just right.
Yeah.
So, I love it. I love what they did with that. I came also away that I feel like they should have a Spider-Punk spin-off movie, or something. I
think he's going to have so much more screen time in the next movie, because he was the like secret MVP, not just in the like fan favorite aspect, like literally in the story. He was the one that's kind of worked behind the scenes and saved the day to just be like, hey, fuck the man, I'm gonna go help this kid. Like, and he did it from the beginning. He did it from the beginning when Miles is like, when they're trying to do that force field at the first sort of time that they cross paths, he immediately is just like, no, dude, whole palm, use your whole palm, not just your fingertips. You'll get a lot. Like, and that's the whole arc for that character, is it comes back around, and that's how Miles escapes. It's like, it's so good.
it's so good. And Daniel Kaluuya, man, I wouldn't. I was like Daniel Kaluuya, a spider.
Well, then you think about like London Punk. It's like,
you think about it, and you're like, ooh, okay,
yeah,
awesome. And and for people who understand what that means, it's like, okay, that's going to be good. And then you see it, it's like, oh, they knocked this out of the park. Like the voice casting, I love what they did with Ben Reilly. Most people won't like it.
I think it's fine. I think what they did with the tone is good. I thought the actual voice acting was like whatever. I think a couple of other people could have done it the same way, whatever.
Yeah.
But I think what they did in terms of like the theming of it, of being like the over dramatic, not like early 90s version of the character, then absolutely the right tone on it.
Yeah. Yeah. It was great. And also like how they adapted like what they did with Issa Rae Spider-Woman.
Yep.
Anybody that knows, it's like they adapted that perfectly. It's just enough to kind of harken back to the comics and make it their own thing with that character.
Yeah.
I just loved it. But for me, I feel like how the world looked was the most important thing for me coming out of this movie. I kind of made mental notes throughout this whole movie about like, I have to use that for my phone lock screen. I have to use this for
every frame of this movie is
every frame.
You could pull it out and it is a frameable work of art. It is crazy.
It's amazing. And when you had the scenes with Gwen and her father, especially in the first part before she goes off and meets the Spider Society, I like how the background changed with the mood of what they were talking about, especially when Gwen revealed herself and quote unquote, this is not using this, but came out to her father that she is Spider-Woman.
Yeah.
That was really well handled, not only in terms of the voice acting, but how the scenes and the artwork changed in the background and emotionally how that could translate to something in real life. Like I was moved.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I was
so let me get into this real quick, because anyone who does listen to this show or watch the show knows I am a person who sobs in movies. Like I am an easy mark for an emotional moment. The first movie, I just watched it the other day again leading into this movie, and it still hits me 5 separate times that I just like break down.
Yeah.
I never quite got there in this movie. And I think the closest I got was in that moment with Gwen and her father. But because it always comes back to dad stuff for me. But like,
yeah,
with this movie, I think knowing that for the most part, arcs weren't going to be completed, I wasn't given the moment of release. Like I had the buildup of the emotion, but I wasn't given the moment of release to let it out. I'm going to, I'm sure the next movie like is just 2 hours of me just nonstop crying because of that.
Yeah.
And that's why I think I came the closest with that Gwen moment, because of this whole movie, that's the one arc that feels like it's at least a completed storyline. It's not a full arc for her character, like in general, but like that was a bookended thing. Like this movie started with that and it almost ended with that. So that's where I'm like, I felt the resolution and the signal to let it out. So it's kind of a weird situation, because like I'm sure when I can watch these back to back, that's when it'll hit more.
Right.
But I do agree that on the art style of her universe in particular is just unbelievable. Like straight out from the covers from her series, and it's like absolutely amazing. And you just see like another reason I got so close is just like seeing the change in the background of like seeing it start to run and seeing that watercolor just start to come down the page, if you will, of the movie screen. That's when it like started to build up in me, and they use every tool, even if it didn't hit me as hard as the previous movie. They're using every tool to have that impact in, I think, a more subtle way. Whereas like What's Up Danger is one of the all-time great scenes of any movie, right?
Agreed.
But the thing is, it's not subtle. They're like, oh, no, yo, you're going to feel so good for this kid that he's rising up right now that you are just going to sob. And I think that the stuff that happens in this movie, it's a little more under the radar with how they're doing it. They're putting stuff in the background that'll let you do like feel it a little bit more in the peripheral, as opposed to just like, yo, we're going to make you cry. So it's
right. And, you know, I think like backtracking, going into knowing that there was going to be, you know, a trilogy of movies focused on Miles. One of the first questions was, okay, how are they going to handle Jefferson's death?
Mm-hmm.
Like that was one of my biggest questions. And now starting to see it play out, that's what got me. Especially when they start revealing to him, it's like, hey, you gotta let your dad die. Like, that's like, he's like, how am I supposed to let my dad die? Would you let your Uncle Ben die? Like that.
There's a little bit of a thing with this too, where I'm just like, his uncle died.
Yeah.
Like he already had that moment. Like we definitely had the Uncle Ben moment with Aaron. So it's a little bit strange to think about that, where they're like, well, yeah, but now you have to lose somebody else. And it's like,
right.
All right. Like, that's a little mean, but okay.
I'm like, I mean, but it's like, you know, when you think about, you know, main Spidey, he lost Uncle Ben, he lost Gwen in the main timeline, he lost Gwen. So I'm like, he loses May at some point. It's like, well,
I totally understand what they're doing, but it's one of those things where I'm like, come on, man. But I like that they're using that in this movie as a way to confront that trope, because they can use Miles to say, no, you don't have to experience trauma to be special. You don't have to go through life. And again, he has experienced trauma. He lost his uncle literally like as he was about to hug him. But like, it's one of those things where I'm like, I'm kind of on both sides of this, where I'm like, man, I wish they weren't doing this storyline of like forcing trauma in order to make it right kind of thing. But like, I appreciate that they're using it in the way that they are to counter the trope that we've experienced for like our whole lifetimes, going back decades before that too. So, you know, it's an interesting thing that I'm experiencing with this movie that I think I'm just going to have so much unresolved feelings about until the next movie.
Yeah. I think we all are. And, you know, I think one of my other questions about how they're going to handle it is like, how is Miguel going to evolve?
Yeah, we haven't even talked about Miguel at all.
Like, I was just like, what do you think about Miguel and how they portrayed him in this one?
Based on the trailers, I knew he was going to be this way, but it's not a route I expected, knowing other takes on the character, because it's not true to any other version that I have experienced, like the comics or like the video games, like Shattered Dimensions, which kind of like set off all of Spider-Verse stuff. Like if I recall correctly, that game came out and then Dan Slott was like, yo, let's make a comic that's like that. And then like, that's how it just kind of all happened, because all of them were disparate and never connected until that game, which I really enjoy that game still, even though it's not one of the open world Spider-Man games. But it's an interesting thing, because a lot, you know, it causes confusion, I think, with the people who don't understand, but like who have a hard time differentiating between a villain and an antagonist.
Yeah.
And they think any antagonist or person that gets in the way of the hero is a villain. And I think that this is probably going to end up as one of those things where when people talk about the bad guys of this movie, I think they're going to talk more about Miguel than the Spot, which is crazy to think about, even though like there is a clear line of Miguel is an antagonist who is getting in the way of the hero for the right reasons, in theory. But like the villain is the Spot. And I think there's going to just be this, at least until the next movie, when it all comes to a blow and you actually see the culmination of the Spot just like expanding and taking more and more over of the space-time shit. People are just going to think of Miguel as the villain. And that's such a strange thing for me.
It is strange. It is strange. And I even during I'm watching, I was like, wow, they're not using the Spot as much as you would think they should. And then you get to the Miguel scenes and you're like, oh, this exactly to your point. That's why.
But it's also you have to think about the like it's because it's not just one movie. This is just an act.
Right.
So like you're gonna get more of the Spot because he's the sky beam, right? And that happens at the end of the 3-act story. Yeah.
And I feel like one of the most heartbreaking things for me is having like Miles, when he starts coming in, he meets Miguel, he immediately started talking Spanish.
Yeah.
And Miguel starts to talk a little bit. He felt like he's found another Spider-Man that he can connect with on that level.
Yeah.
And then you realize this dude is not rocking for me at all.
Yeah. Yeah, because he's had these multiple different variations of like Peter A at the beginning of Into the Spider-Verse, where he's having that "you're like me" moment. And there's those things happen throughout that movie of like, oh, you're like me. And then he meets up with Peter B and it's like, oh, you're like me. And then he has that mentorship with him. And then he has a more like age appropriate, like I can just have somebody my age relate to that is like me with Gwen. And then he has the whole crew come in of like Noir and Spider Pig and whatever. And they literally do the "you're like me" thing again. And so like knowing that that's a thing that Miles gets to experience, and then to have like, oh, you're like me, but then pull the rug from underneath him is such a like, it's a very good like narrative decision, but it's just like, oh man, I feel so bad for the kid right now.
I do. I felt when Miguel comes on screen for the second time, when he meets Miguel or when he meets Miles, for me there was a fear. There was a, is he going to kill Miles? And as he got through the third act, especially when Gwen and her father make up, and then you have that revelation that Miles is in another universe. I kept expecting for Miguel to come through the screen and kill one of those characters.
Yep.
I don't know. I was like, I don't want to know. I'm just
because that's the obvious thing. That's the thing that you expect to happen because we've seen that happen.
Right. And they didn't do that, which I applaud.
Well, that's where this series and all of its creators, like, they are the best at what they do, because they are taking those expectations and subverting them in a way that doesn't make you go, what? They subvert in a way where you go, oh, thank God. Like, it's like when you have that moment, that's just an easy grab, because that's the reason it happens so often. It would have been the easy thing to like gut punch the audience with killing one of like a character off. Even if it's a character that isn't like Gwen or Miles or anything like that, it still would have been affecting.
Right.
So to actually like go the other direction and set it up in a way where it's like, okay, it's clearly a rescue mission to get Miles out of that universe. It's also a rescue mission to get Miles out of the way of Miguel, but also Miguel's or Miles's story is now clearly going to be like changing Miguel's heart, like figuring out a way to, and it's the No Way Home thing where they were like, well, this Peter saves people. He doesn't let them die. He's going to get them home. And so that's why that worked so well. That's why it works so well in this. I think that, and it's wild that like Avi Arad is involved in these movies with, granted he's a producer by name, but like, it's crazy to think of how involved he is with these, with how not that way any other movie he ever makes.
Thank you for bringing that up.
Spider-Man 2, I would say like that movie has some of the subtlety stuff with it, but like it still falls into a lot of those problems.
Like these movies are more Feige than they are more Avi. And
I think that honestly, I think that they surpass what Feige's been capable of doing with that same kind of thing too.
I agree. It's the fact that these are purely Sony movies. Yes, they have the Marvel Disney relationship with it because they have to, because they're Marvel characters. But to think that these are Sony Spider-Man characters with Avi Arad producing, it's like
the last movie to come out of this was Morbius. How is this the same studio?
Case in point.
Granted, it's Sony Animation and Sony proper, but like it's crazy.
Crazy to think about. And look, it's like, and for me, it's like I live right down the street from Sony. Right, I live right down the street. I go into
that's why when Morbius came out, you ran down the street going, Avi, what the hell?
I literally, when Morbius came out, I did not take that street at all.
Yeah,
because I had to take that street to turn off to my street, and I was like,
you knew the protesters would be blocking it.
I was just like, why? And like literally, there's just tons of Morbius posters lighting on the sidewalk. But for me to think about that, this is the same studio, same producers, with Amy Pascal, of course, involved as well.
I think she's way more involved than Avi is, though. Yeah.
Yeah, it's, and I think you can tell, especially because I think she's had Feige kind of rub off on her in a little bit.
Yeah.
In the way that Feige understands the comic characters, and he's gotten to the core of, okay, you can take what the comics do and do your own thing.
Yeah.
But don't get away from who these characters are at the end of the day.
Yep.
And that's why I feel like Amy is picked up so well in these movies. So, maybe he's a producer in name only. But
I think just anything Spider-Man where it's just like, yeah, okay, call Avi, put his name on it.
Right. It's like, how much influence does he have? But I think they've made the right decision, especially with the creators and the directors. Like, when they had that change up going from Peter Ramsey to Joaquin Dos Santos, I was like, oh.
Okay. I wasn't nervous, but I was surprised.
Yes.
Peter Ramsey is unbelievably talented. And so it wasn't a doubt on the quality of what could come out of it. It was just but can it live up to what my head, like what was happening in my head with what Peter was going to do?
Right. And then you find out, oh, Kent Powers, and I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
It's like, they started carefully lining up those dominoes, and then you later, like 5 years later, you finally get to see how those dominoes fall.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. It's amazing.
And thankfully, we don't have to wait that long for the culmination.
Thank
like,
God.
yeah,
Thank God.
it's not another like 3 to 4 years. It's actually, it's doing the Infinity War and Endgame where like,
yeah,
they were working on both at the same time. So they're not good to go yet, but like they're close.
I mean, Fast and Furious could have, learned something about that. But
Fast and Furious needed to learn a lot of things over the last. I used to, dude, I used to be a defender of that series.
Yeah, I know.
And I am hard out. I haven't seen the last 2.
Really?
Yep. Because I'm so disinterested now because of the whole, okay, we're doing a culmination. We're doing our end game. Yeah. But
yeah.
And then they're like, oh wait, but now it's going to be 2 movies. Oh wait, now it's going to be 3 movies. Oh wait, now it's going to be The Rock's 4th movie in between the one that just came out and the next movie. Oh wait, there's going to be spin-offs. And I'm like, dude, you just ruined the excitement I had for seeing this story come to a close. And I'm like, I'm done. I'm done.
Exactly. It's like Universal, you have other franchises, but we're going on top. But
yeah,
I'm excited. That was the first question that my wife asked coming. She's like, do we have to wait another year like we did between Infinity War? I was like, nope, it's less than a year. It's March. She's like, yay, we're going to see this movie. Same theater.
It's still going to feel like a long time, but it's not a long time.
Right. Exactly. Compared to 2018 and 2023.
Yeah.
So I feel like they did really well and they made all the right decisions. And Lord and Miller, I know that they had that solo drama, but I kind of want to just give them everything that is not Spidey Spider-Man.
Yeah.
They have.
Yeah.
That's how good they've done with this.
I can't believe that the rest of the Spider-Man, like this is one of those things where it's like Avi doesn't want to give up that power. That I think somebody probably has talked to them about doing that, but Avi's like, no, these are my movies. These live action villain movies, these are my movies. Like, man, right. I'm so I'm so annoyed by the idea of this Craven movie that's coming out.
I know you're about to go there.
Because not even just with MCU stuff, which is, MCU is back now with, or the other Spider-Man stuff is back with technically within the MCU and whatever. But like, I'm still so annoyed by the fact that the first Amazing Spider-Man set up Craven in the second movie and they just abandoned that entirely. It's so frustrating
with that. I don't know what happened with that. And look, I love Aaron Taylor Johnson. He's like one of my favorite actors working today. Craven, however, I have a bunch of question marks on. Yeah. A bunch. And I hope it goes more in the way of how Venom went than it did Morbius. Now, granted, Venom still has its issues. But
did you see that second movie?
On here, the second Venom, I didn't see the second one. I didn't see the second one.
The things that sorry, I'm cutting you off. The first Venom movie I thought was like bad but enjoyable because I liked what Tom Hardy was doing.
Exactly.
And then nobody else in that movie got the memo that he was going to do that. So like it all just was a mess. And then the second movie, everyone was like, oh, see how Tom Hardy went to 10? We're all going to go to 10. And it's a lot. It's so much.
Oh, geez.
Like the 2003 energy of the first movie is like multiplied in the second one.
Oh, okay, yeah. Never mind then. I retract that statement.
Visually, Carnage looks cool though. I'll give him that. So there's that.
Okay, maybe I need to see it then, just to kind of see where they go with
it. Dude, it's like 87 minutes. You'll get through it pretty quick. It's so short.
Good. I'll put it on while I'm putting together my new IKEA dresser. I have a bunch of question marks about Craven, Morbius. I just no. Back to this whole thing. It's just like these being so many Spider-Man movies, it completely flips the brain on what they've been able to achieve.
Yeah.
And I feel like they've kind of just let Lord and Miller steer. and just take their hands off the wheel, which is essentially when you have, filmmakers of that caliber who know what they're doing, who have handled live action, who have handled animation, who have done comedy, who have done drama, sit back and just let them do their thing.
Yeah. It's the studio and the EPs got extremely lucky with the producers and creative teams of that first movie, and they luckily recognized it. Yeah. And then, so like on the first movie, I don't know if they were given all of the leniency in the world. It sort of feels like it, but like it's a smaller scope movie in a way. So it's still a little simpler in terms of the story it's telling, even though it is like this multiversal thing. But with this movie, I think that they were like, oh, that last movie, go nuts on this one. Yeah, absolutely go for it.
Yeah, essentially. And, Ramsey's still an executive producer, so he's still, I don't know what level of involvement he had, but essentially, I feel like he was still there kind of guiding.
Oh, I'm sure he was like a mentor, counselor kind of thing. Yeah.
Would it had to.
Consultant, not counselor, consultant.
Yeah. I feel like this movie was even more culturally relevant than the first one was. It's like you had the hip hop, you had the, Puerto Rican flavor here, but this one has it more ingrained.
Yeah.
Even yesterday I was on a walk listening to the whole soundtrack, and I was like, oh, this feels like Black Panther soundtrack.
Yes.
This is exactly what that felt like to me. So, I just, I have to go out when the second one comes out and just go buy both. I don't know why I don't own the first one yet. But I'm just gonna have to go buy it. Just
because it's on streaming. Is it out like on vinyl or anything yet? Do we know?
The soundtrack, I don't know. It just came out Friday.
Yeah, they put it digitally though, like on release day.
Yeah. So I don't know. I gotta buy the soundtrack. I gotta buy the movies because this. I don't know. This is probably one of my, I'm trying to figure out how to put this in words, but like, as far as this trilogy, of course, we haven't seen the third one yet, but so far, this is going to be
it's going to be one of the best trilogies of all time if they follow it up. If they are able to stick the landing, by far one of the we think of Back to the Future, maybe not the best example because it's kind of like all over the place, but like we think it's the original trilogy Star Wars, right? We think of the Lord of the Rings trilogy and ignore The Hobbit. But yeah, we have a bunch of these trilogies where we think of like trilogies. These are kind of top tier. This is in its current trajectory, looking to live up to those, if not possibly surpass them. And it's an animated trilogy. That's bonkers.
That's the thing.
We didn't talk about any of the live action stuff in this movie. Fucking Donald Glover's in this movie.
See, I was gonna leave that out, but when he came
we're talking spoilers, man. We've been talking spoilers for 30 minutes at this point.
I loved it. I love how they had that nod to the MCU. And I forget which Spider-Man said that. Was it Kobe that said he caught him?
Yes.
Yeah. And he's like, oh, I caught him myself. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. It's perfect. And then they had, I forget what her name is for the Venom movie.
Oh, Mrs. Chen.
Clerk. Yeah.
That was fine.
Really well done.
Yeah.
Really well done.
If we're going to get into that universe with these movies, make it Mrs. Chen. I'm happy with that.
Right. I'm glad it wasn't Venom doing like we are Venom. Like I'm glad it wasn't that. It was just
why am I in this weird universe? It must be that Spider-Man guy.
Right.
Okay.
Oh, we must eat Spider-Man. He's delicious. Like it was like, thank God it wasn't any of that. Yeah. But Donald Glover being in it, Donald Glover for Prowler, make it happen. They have to make that happen.
They did the setup in Homecoming, so like, yeah, you have to. But then on top of that, just like, we didn't really talk about the cameos aspect of it, of like known Spider people, not just the ones that were created for this or whatever. But like, you know, we had the Ben Reilly, we had Unlimited Spider-Man, which technically means we did have 90s animated Spider-Man in there, because that is a sequel series to the 90s animated series.
Exactly.
We had Spectacular Spider-Man in there. Listen, old heads that are my age are going to always want to say the 90s Spider-Man. No, Spectacular Spider-Man is the best animated Spider-Man series by far.
Agreed.
It took some getting used to because we grew up with the other one, but like,
yeah,
in terms of the story they tell, it's just so much better. What else? I mean, obviously, like the live action stuff with like Toby and Andrew Garfield in there and stuff. No Tom. We'll get that next movie, obviously.
Yeah.
But just like the amount of stuff that was the Spider-Man Web of Shadows made an appearance. Like the video game.
I saw that.
It's like crazy.
They just bought it all
like
in.
I expected to see more of the modern game in there, which we did, and Yuri Lowenthal actually voiced him, which was great this time, instead of just being a suit on a mannequin. But we like the fact that they're going to Web of Shadows, which, like, don't get me wrong, there are a bunch of people who adore that game. I am not one of them. I think that game is bad. But the swinging didn't feel good, and I didn't like the story. It's whatever. But yeah, the deep cuts in this surpassed my expectation of deep cuts, like in a big way. Like that one in particular is insane. Like it is bonkers that they were like, you know what? Yeah, let's get Web of Shadows into this thing.
Like, and they had, you know, what is it? The silver suited Spider-Man.
Yep.
They had the Spider-Man with a hammer. I was like, man, like,
I want to, like, when we're able to freeze frame this, I want to see if they got all the variants, because the 90s cartoon also did a Spider-Verse thing technically, with how that finale of that show ended. The silver suit, they played it as an entirely different universe. That's where we got the Carnage infusion with Peter Parker, so I want to see that.
Yeah.
I need to, like, I want to see the freeze frames from this, because I want to see, like, I'm not going to reach back and get it, but I have like the 90s cartoon action figure when he's got the 6 arms and stuff. I want to see all this stuff in there. And then they even did what's the name of, I forget the name of the cowboy, but I know the name of the horse. The horse's name is Widow, but like, the first appearance of those characters, there is a joke in that comic where they say, Miles is saying, like, why is he wearing a mask? Why is the horse wearing a mask? And they changed it up a little bit. They changed the wording up a little bit. They say in this, they say to hide his face. In the comic, they do say, like, well, to make sure he hides his secret identity. I think that's the better version of it. But like the fact that they did that line, which is one of my favorite jokes of all time in comics, is just phenomenal. I think that's a Taran Killam issue as well. So I'm like, it's just, some of that stuff just blew me away, and like it got a laugh in the room, but like I was the one laughing the hardest. It's like,
I mean, if you know, and that's what I enjoy about these movies so much. It's like, if you know, you know.
Yep.
And even if you don't know, there's still enough meat on the bone in this movie for you to enjoy it.
Yeah.
And even if you want to be one of those people to know, here you go. Here's the basis for everything you need to know. Go forth and enjoy and kind of figure out the joy of loving not only Peter Parker, but Spider-Man in particular. Now we have Mayday. I want to see how that goes. I love how they get her in this movie, like, especially when at the end, she's like, "Look out the window," and she kind of pulls her mask over her face in the same way that Toby did in the movies. Perfect.
It's I
think
the way that they're able to handle these tangential characters in that good of a way, it's like, man, I hope that after the third movie they take a break and then they come back and do like a Mayday in another like 5 or 6 years, because that would like they're setting these things up in a way that it's just like they can organically start again.
Exactly. And they're going about it the right way. With the animated movies, live action, whole other thing. I gotta say, one of my favorite parts of the casting of this movie, they got Jarrell Jerome to do Tyler Miles.
Yeah.
If you know who Jarrell Jerome is, if you saw When They See Us, finally they made that happen. I thought that was probably some of the most genius casting of the movie.
Yeah.
Because people, I'm not sure if you've seen it, but there's been a lot of people, because he's also Afro-Latino, like Miles is. They've been wanting him to move or to either live action or either one.
Yeah.
We did it. And I'm very happy about it. Very happy.
I think that's a good note to end on.
Yeah.
Because we could keep going forever on this movie, but like, I think that kind of like heartwarming moment's probably good. Clement, dude, it's always good to chat it up with you. I'm really glad if we got to wait 8 years for the next Batman movie, at least we got another Spider-Verse coming.
Thank God, dude. I cannot wait. And I might go see Transformers next week, but that's a whole other thing.
Yeah, I'm probably not going to have an episode about that one.
Fair.
Listen,
right,
I've heard it's not as good as Bumblebee, but it's better than the majority of the Transformers movies. That's a success. Good job, everybody. But yeah, thanks again for coming back on. Until next time.